So in the previous lecture, we first started to configure the test branch for our iOS application. And so we know that now every time a new build is generated for the test branch, meaning every time we merge from dev, it is going to generate a release as well. We also started a pull request to merge everything from dev into test. But of course, before we were able to merge everything, some checks had to pass. Now that the checks have passed, we would be able to correctly merge into test. However, so far it would only generate one release, the iOS release. What I want to do in this lecture is set up the release for the Android application, which is going to be very similar setup to the iOS one. Of course, I will have to navigate here to the Android project, and over on the Build tab, set up the test branch. Currently, it is already set up with some settings in here, but so far, these don't allow me to distribute to my users, a distribution group, for example. So the first thing I will change is the configuration. It is now going to be release. Contrary to what we see on iOS, we don't see an option in here for us to build for simulator or device, but we do have the ability to sign the builds, which we will have to do. We will also have to upload a file similar to what we did on iOS, but we will do this in just a minute. The other things that I want to set is for the build to be tested on a real device, just like on iOS, to make sure that the application launches before we are generating a release. And finally, we're also going to be distributing the builds. Again, it is this option the one that enables continuous delivery. Just as we saw up here that building this branch on every push enables continuous integration, this one right here enables continuous delivery. Eventually, we will also deliver to a store, but that is for a further lecture in this section. Right now, I want to set up the beta testers group that I created earlier. And now I would be able to save. Of course, just as we saw, we have to sign this build with this file, a key store file. So before we can save this, similar to what we did on iOS, we're going to have to generate this file. Now, contrary to iOS, we will be able to generate that file directly on our computers. So what I will do is navigate here to the terminal. And on the terminal, make sure that you are able to execute javac. In case you are not able to execute javac, you don't see something similar to this, you're going to have to navigate over to Visual Studio. On Visual Studio, navigate over to Tools, and take a look at the SDK Manager. In here, you're going to find a location section, and there is a Java SDK location. Since you've been able to develop for Android, you do have the SDK installed, it is just that probably it is not set up correctly on your general system. So just copy this location, this path, and what you will do is navigate back to your terminal, execute cd so you are certain that you are on the root directory, and execute, for example, code.bash_profile. Now, the code in here just means that I'm going to be opening this file on Visual Studio Code, but you could of course use Nano or something different. So just execute this, and this will open your bash profile. In here, make sure that you set to export java_home equal to that path that you just copied from Visual Studio. Once you have this, simply save the file, close the terminal, and reopen it. Now you should be able to execute javac correctly. Now you will be able to navigate back to the terminal and execute the key tool. So simply write key tool, and you will have to add a flag that is going to be gen key pair, a v flag as well, a key store flag, and after key store you're going to have to set a path or a directory where you want this file to be saved. So you can set anything in here. I am going to set my desktop as the destination. Right after this location, you're going to have to set the name of the file. And this again can be pretty much anything. So I will set this as redbooks.keystore. This .keystore extension is the important part. The name, it just doesn't really matter. After this, I am going to set an alias as well. And this alias is going to be rather important eventually, so just make sure that you remember it. After this, I am going to set an algorithm to be used, which is going to be RSA. The key size, which is going to be 2048. And for how long this is going to be available, I'm just going to set this as a large number, so it is available for a ton of time. I believe this is in days. So just execute this. And you're going to be prompted to enter a password. This password, again, you will use later on, so make sure that you do not forget it. Re-enter that same password. And answer at least one of the following questions. So what is your first and last name? And the next one you could even leave empty, but if you can, just go ahead and answer them. Finally, you can enter a new password. You can just return if it's going to be the same one. And there you go. The key store is now generated. So just like on the case on iOS, we can navigate back to App Center and upload that key store. Mine is going to be located here on my desktop, so I just select it. And notice that I am, of course, going to require the key store password, the key password, which in my case is going to be the same, and the key alias. So I hope you didn't forget them. And after you've entered them, you are good to go. You can click on Save. Remember that we changed the configuration to release. We said that we were going to sign these builds. We had to create this key store file as we just did. Because this build is now going to be signed, we can test on a real device and can of course distribute, so our application can be installed on devices. In our case so far, we have set up these beta testers distribution group, so we are selecting that one. So we can now click on Save. Now both our iOS and our Android projects have set up a release to be created when we merge into the test branch. So finally, we can come back over to GitHub, over to the pull request that we started to merge everything from dev into test. And since the checks have passed, I can merge the pull request. This, just as we've seen before, is going to trigger a build, as we are used to. Of course, this is an automatic build, not a pull request build that gets triggered as soon as the pull request is initiated. The new thing is that when this build is complete, it is also going to be signed with the key store that we generated for Android or with the provisioning profile that we generated for iOS. And as soon as these builds are signed, they will be able to be distributed to our beta testers groups. So I will have to wait a few minutes to see the test builds be completed. And as soon as that is ready, I will show you the results. So here we go. After a few minutes, the build is ready. And this is the case of Android. But if we navigate to iOS, we're going to see exactly the same. On the test branch, the build is ready. We've seen this before. We are used to this. However, this time, App Center not only created the build, automatic build as we saw, but as soon as the build was ready, it signed it and started to distribute it. Notice that if we navigate over to Distribute, Groups, and select our group, there is a new release available. There you have it. This is continuous delivery. All that we had to do was merge into our branch for, of course, continuous integration to be triggered, and now also continuous delivery. We can see that over on the Releases tab as well, with the destination being beta testers, the date, how many downloads, so far of course 0, and we can see exactly the same in the case of Android. Over in Distribute, on beta testers, we see this release, and of course also in the Releases tab. Congratulations, you have successfully implemented CI and CD with the use of App Center. Now, we are not done yet. In the next lecture, we're going to see how our users will be able to install these releases. And we still have to set up the stores. That is going to be a different process to what we just did with distribution groups, although eventually setting everything from the master branch is going to be very similar. But let's just not get ahead of ourselves. In the next lecture, let's take a look at how our users would install these new releases.